What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. The day has come that you all have been waiting for. We finally got the motor back from the machine shop. Here it is. So like I said previously, he did the crank, he just polished it, it was in spec, everything was good. Just cleaned it up, made sure it was good to go. Block has been bored 0.5 millimeters over, and then the deck has been surfaced, and he actually took off a little more than I was hoping. There were some imperfections in it, and I think he took off about 10 thousandths. But with these pistons, these are about 8 thousandths shorter than the stock piston, so we still should be in spec for one of the head gaskets at least. I'll have to put it all together and verify that. And then he also went through these rods and just measured out the clearances. I gave him bearings. I'm gonna double check everything, every clearance on this motor, but I just wanted him to check out the rods, make sure those are good, and he said they all checked out good. So what we have to do is measure all these clearances. So we're gonna measure the rod bearing clearance to the crank. We're gonna measure the main bearing clearance. We have to put the entire bottom end together, crank, rods, pistons in the block, and we have to measure the piston protrusion, how much that piston sticks out of the block, to see if we need either more taken off, if it's too deep, if he cut too much off, he can recon the rods to shorten them a little bit. I don't suspect we'll have to do that with what he took off. So, and then we also have to measure the piston to cylinder clearance and all the ring end gaps. So what I'm going to start with right now is bearing. So I'm going to measure the clearance for the rod bearings and the mains, get that out of the way. Then we'll go through, measure the piston to cylinder wall clearance. I told him the spec of, I think he said like 1.6 thou, 1.8 thou, something like that. So I got to double check that, make sure that's in spec. And then we can throw it all together and, like I said, check that piston protrusion and see what is going on there. So another thing I just picked up is a new GoPro. So I got the Black Hero 8. I think that'll be pretty sweet for more point of view videos. A lot of this stuff, I can strap the thing to my head. I bought it actually a head mount, so I can strap it, work with two hands, and show you exactly what I'm doing from the point of view, as I'm working. So some of the tools I got, I borrowed some stuff from my dad. We have a bore gauge here. I just have this little block that I'll show you what I'm using with that. We got some micrometers and let's see, I don't know, a bunch of tools. So outside micrometer, I think there was some T gauges, some other stuff. So all the tools that I need to measure all this out. And you don't need these extremely expensive tools to do this. If you guys aren't doing it all the time, you can use plastic gauge. No, it's not as accurate, but for the most part, it's close enough. I've actually used it in the past and never had any issues. But this is obviously a lot better, a lot more accurate. So I'm doing it this way, especially on a TDI. All these clearances are pretty tight, so you have to be pretty accurate with your measurements. So let's get to work. Let's get these rods measured out, crank journals measured out. All right, we got these rods measured out, got the clearance measured, and so this is what he had, the machine shop had measured for a clearance is 2 thousandths on every one. What I got is a little bit tighter, so those are the clearances there. So I got 1.4, 1.6, 1.5, 1.7, and then that is the factory spec, so it is well within that range. We are good to go there. So now I am going to get my bearings, my mains in here, torque my main caps, and we'll measure the clearance for the mains. All right, we got the crank and the block measured out. Here's what we got for clearances. So there's the crank, there's the block. Here's our oil clearance. So 2.4, 2.3, 444, and the factory spec is 1.2 to 3.1. So we are well within the spec, a little on the looser end, but not a huge deal. It's within spec, so I'm happy with that. I do have the BRM oil pump upgrade, so that'll definitely help keep an oil pressure, so I'm not terribly worried about a little bit looser of a clearance on the main, so we should be good to go there. Got the pistons out, so these are actually different. 1 and 2 are different than 3 and 4 because of the way the valve reliefs are set up. So you can see here the intake, the bigger one is on the left, and then 3 and 4 is on the right. So it's actually printed on here. It says cylinder 3 or 4, cylinder 3 or 4, cylinder 1 or 2. So what I'm going to do is measure these pistons. You want to measure on the skirt, because actually these pistons are like 20 thousandths smaller at the crown than the skirt. So you want to measure the biggest spot of the piston. So that is the skirt. I forget how far up. It was like a ½ inch or something. So I'll get that spec, measure this, and then I'm going to set my bore gauge to that exact dimension of the piston. It'll be zeroed out on the diameter of the piston, so when I put it in the block, it'll show me my exact clearance. So that's the easiest way to do it, I feel. So let's get this measured out, get the block measured, and see what our clearance is. All right, guys, so you want to measure 10 millimeters up from the bottom of the skirt and at a 90 degree from that piston pin. So just using the outside micrometer. All right, we got the pistons measured out. They are actually marked 79.96 millimeters on the top, and I verified that 3.148 is 79.96 millimeters. So those are all what they should be. So now what I'm going to do is take this measurement of the piston. I'm going to zero my bore gauge at that measurement. So when I put this in the cylinder, it will automatically just read my clearance. So let's do that. This is already shimmed out. It should be pretty close. So I might have to adjust it a little bit, but it should be pretty close. I should just be able to stick this, compress it a little bit, and then zero the gauge out, and then we'll be ready to go. Alright guys, we got this piston to cylinder wall clearance checked. So we got something going on. Obviously, you're supposed to check your clearances with a torque plate torqued on here because that's how the cylinders were honed and shaped. But I don't have that. I sent it back already. So I'm getting a measurement. It's all distorted like halfway down the cylinder. It's distorted. I'm getting from like 1/1000 all the way up to 3/1000 clearance, but at the bottom of the cylinder where it shouldn't have ever been distorted from having a torque plate on, because really your rod bolts only go down an inch and a half, 2 inches, so it really shouldn't distort the bottom of the cylinder. I'm getting 3/1000 clearance at the bottom, so that is double of what I should have. Now we got to put this thing together, check the piston protrusion, make sure that is in spec, make sure the deck is flat with the piston, so it's not, make sure you didn't deck it, you know, at an angle or something weird. So we got to check that. So let's put this thing together and see what we got. All right guys, so I got the whole rotating assembly together. Mains are torqued to 48 foot-pounds and the rods are torqued to 22 foot-pounds. That's all good to go. It turns over, so that's a good sign. So let's flip this thing over and I'll show you exactly how to check that piston protrusion. All right guys, we're gonna check this piston protrusion now. So what I'm using is a mag-based dial indicator, and then what I'm using this block for is, if you can't see the pistons, these pistons have this valve relief that cuts all the way out to the edge of the piston, and you need to measure the projection along the center line of the crank because this piston will rock. Because obviously the crown, like I said, the crown is a lot smaller, so the piston will rock in the cylinder. So you need to measure here and here. If you measure here or here, it's going to be way off because, like I said, the piston moves. So what I'm going to do is take this as a machinist block, really flat. Make sure you have something that's flat and true. Set it on the block. Then you'll get your dial indicator. Strap it onto the block like that. Then we'll bring it over to the front of the piston and make sure it is centered on the piston. And we'll set this onto that block and zero out the gauge. You can adjust it here. So we're zeroed out right there, and then you'll just turn the motor over. So you can see the piston's at top dead center right there. And we're at 40 thousandths. So then we'll take this, we'll move it to the back of the piston. Make sure it's centered. Zero it out again. And make sure your measurement's the same right there. 40 thousandths, just a touch over 40 thousandths. But you can see that gauge. These mag bases work great, but they're a little finicky sometimes. So right there, 40 thousandths exactly. So then the biggest thing you need to make sure is that your projection is the same from the front of the deck to the back of the deck, because these blocks are decked off the center line of the crank and not the bottom of the block. So a lot of machine shops will just set your block on their table, cut the deck, and you'll end up with one piston, the front piston being say 3 or 4 thousandths higher or lower because the deck is cut crooked. So I made sure he strapped this block on the table with the center line of the crank. So we need to come back here and we need to measure this again on the rear cylinder. Same procedure, make sure it's centered. So we're zeroed out there. We come up and we're right on the dot, 40 thousandths. Then we'll do the same thing here. Okay, we got zeroed out. 40 thousandths. So we are good to go. So then you want to go through, do every hole. Make sure you do every cylinder, the front and the back of the piston. Make sure everything is flat and true and straight. and then you can pick your head gasket. So I don't know if you'll be able to see this. So I am at 40 thousandths. A two-hole head gasket is 39.8 to 43.3. So I fall perfectly in the range of a two-hole. So I'm going to order up a two-hole gasket, and we shouldn't have to touch this block at all. All right, guys, if you're working on a TDI and you don't have a dial indicator, there's a few things you can do. So you can either use a depth gauge like I have here. These are fairly accurate, not nearly as accurate as a dial indicator. Or if you're really cheap and you don't want to spend any money, you can use a pair of calipers. It's not super accurate. I'm going to show you what I get for a reading. The hardest part is getting the piston at 100% top dead center. I think I got it close here. Let's throw these calipers on and see what we got. So I got 39, and dial indicator showed 40, 39.5 now it says. So actually that's a lot closer than I thought it was going to be. All right, one other thing we got to check is the end play of the crank. So the spec is 2.8 thousandths to 6.7 thousandths. So you have to push the crank all the way one way, zero out your gauge, and then we'll pull the crank the opposite way. And I am 1, 2, 3, a little over 3 thousandths. This isn't a super accurate dial indicator, but I am over 3 and below 6, so we're in spec, and we're at the low end of the spec, so we are good to go there. Check it out, we got our head back, looking brand new. Like always, love my head guy. He really takes care of these things. So what I want to do is I want to torque this thing on the block and then go through and measure the block again and see if it rounds out 100%. So another thing I noticed is right at the top of the bore, we got almost right about just over 1 thousandths clearance. But then as you go down, a little over 2 there, then all the way up to 3 thousandths there, even more than 3 right there. So I don't know if maybe their boring machine was screwed up, something's up anyway. So I'm going to torque this head on and just kind of see what the block does. Maybe it'll straighten out a little bit. I doubt it's going to, obviously it's not going to tighten up the clearance thou and a half, but I just want to kind of verify that they actually used the torque plate and it will round out and even out those numbers on the top. So let's torque this thing on and see what it does. Alright guys, we got the head torqued down 125 foot-pounds. So I'm just gonna flip it over and use this longer bore gauge, which is already zeroed out at the exact piston dimension. So that'll give us our clearance. So we're gonna see if that bore changes at all with the head torqued. Alright guys, even with this head torqued on it, it still hasn't rounded out the cylinder. So I really don't know, and they're kind of egg shaped too. They're bigger in the middle than they are at the top and the bottom. So it's got to be something with their machine, their hone, their bore, something screwed these things up. All right, the last thing I got to do before I bring this block back, well, I don't have to, but I want to. I got to get these oil squirters aligned with the holes. So you can see there's the hole on the right. That is where the oil shoots up into the piston, into the oil galley and the piston, and the stock pistons don't have that. Here's the stock ALH, and you can see there's no oil galley. So that is one of the biggest improvements of jumping up to an oil galley piston. It stays a lot cooler, a lot more lubricated, and it's just a lot better design. But these, I've already checked when the piston's at all the way down at the bottom, it does align, but the nozzle is at an angle. So when the piston is at top dead center, the oil flow is missing the hole. So we just got to tweak that nozzle a little bit, bend it, and get it aligned so it's shooting straight and hitting that oil galley the entire stroke of that piston. So I'm going to flip the block over, we'll bolt the nozzles on and get those aligned. And what I'm going to use is actually, it's going to be a lot easier to align it with something out of the nozzle. So I got a drill bit that fits in the nozzle like that, so you have a longer sight of where that thing's going to shoot. And also when you're bending it, it'll help not crush the actual nozzle. So should work out pretty good. All right, so you can kind of see right here, it's really hard to get a focus down in that bore, but you can see the end of that drill bit is pointed away from that hole. So what I'm going to do is just get a long pair of pliers, and just tweak that thing a little bit, get it shooting towards that hole a little better. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but the closer you can get it, the better. All right, guys, you should be able to see that. So I bent it a little bit, just got it aimed right towards that far left hole. Oh, it's hard to see down in here, but it's most of the way lined up. Looks pretty good, straight. So all I'm using is just a long pair of needle nose pliers. Just tweak it just a little bit and should be good to go. So I'm going to do that to all four, and we should be done with the squirters at least. All right, guys, I put this bottom end together real quick just to make sure that those oil squirters didn't hit the piston. Actually, the first one I did, it hit the piston on the left side. I don't know if you can see down in there. It's pretty close to the left side, even without bending it. So you kind of had to tweak it a little bit just to get it to clear, but they all clear and they all shoot directly straight down into that piston. So squirters are all done. I'm going to pull this thing back apart and we are done with that. So I talked to the machinist and he wants me to bring the block and the pistons back. He wants to measure them himself with me there and figure out what's going on. If they are, obviously they are screwed up, but if he confirms they're screwed up, we're gonna have to fix it. So it's either they need to fix their machine and they're gonna bore it again and do the neck size up pistons, or bring it to another shop that can actually bore it straight. I don't know. I really don't want to have to buy new pistons, but that might be the only option. Obviously the bores are too big for these pistons, so there's not really a way around that. So I'll bring it back and see what he says. That's gonna have to be Monday. It is Saturday right now. They're closed for Saturday and Sunday, so I'm gonna end this video here. Kind of crappy news, but everything else seems really good. The crank turned out amazing. The heads, or the deck, turned out really flat, and I'm actually excited that the protrusion was perfect, dialed in 100% with what he took off. So I don't have to touch the deck anymore. So we just need to figure out the bores and we can finally put this thing together. So getting excited, but it seems like no matter what happens, when you have somebody else work on your stuff, they always screw it up. I have issues nonstop, but there's a fix for everything. So we're gonna make it happen. We're gonna make it work, and just won't be happening right now. So the next video we're gonna pick up when we get back from the machine shop. We'll see what he says about what he thinks we can do to fix it, what kind of what happened, and we'll make it right. So hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you learned something. If you guys have any questions on these tools, the measuring tools, how to measure, let me know. Give me a comment. I'm not a professional by any means. Like I keep saying, I'm not a professional. Just doing this in my garage. But you can be pretty accurate in your garage. So let me know if you got any questions. Give a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. And we'll see you in the next video.